Welcome everyone. This is the day 2 of the Baltic and Nordic Energy Summit, the 12th annual summit. We had a great day yesterday, lots of interesting speeches and panels, and we expect nothing less from this day too. My name is Laura Huomo. I work at Rosier in Finland as an Energy and Capital Markets Council, and I will be your chairwoman for today. Like yesterday, we had speakers and moderators and panel members, and everybody is free to ask questions. There is a bar on the right-hand side of your screen, so ask any questions at any time, and we will try to moderate them and ask them at the end of each presentation. Without further ado, today is the Renewables Day, like we said yesterday. We will speak a lot about different angles on the renewable side, on the RES, on hydrogen, but then at the end of the day, we will also shortly sort of go back to the issues we had yesterday on regional gas market developments. So a very exciting day ahead of us. Let me introduce our first speaker for today. Mr. Gerhard Bugjans, a COO of IFE Eriksen AG, speaking about the framework conditions for RES in the Nordic and Baltic regions. Gerhard, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be a speaker at this conference, and thank you for the invitation. I will speak about renewable energy investments from an investor's perspective today. Our company, IFE, is developing renewable energy projects in Europe since 1992. We have initiated investments of more than 500 million euros in various countries, mainly wind onshore, but also solar, large scale and small scale. And I would say we are quite experienced with investments in this market and with several different market conditions. We are not a big company, we are a small and medium-sized privately owned company, and this type of company has been the main driver for renewables in many markets for many years. However, the investor landscape has changed and is still changing rapidly. Until 2015, small and medium-sized investment companies have been main actors. They acted usually as project developers and as investors, usually companies that have not been listed, very often privately owned and small, sometimes private placement funds that have collected money from external investors. However, since 2015, we see a very interesting change in the investor landscape. Institutional investors are showing up. Pension funds are showing up and have entered the scene. Larger entities such as Ørsted, Northland Power, NextEra, and for example, Encavis are becoming more and more important, and they develop projects in many cases for their own balance sheets. More recently, the investor landscape has even changed further. Big utilities and energy companies are becoming more and more active, especially offshore wind companies such as Equinor, traditional energy giants such as BP, Shell, RWE, and almost all other energy companies are becoming more and more active in the markets and more important. In my presentation, I want to show you what promotes and what hinders renewable project realization and what kind of regulatory setup is required to increase renewables. I'm not the type of person that wants to promote any particular type of setup and not even to make propaganda for a massive increase of renewables in the Baltic markets. I'm not a renewable enthusiast. I'm more a kind of skeptical person in this matter. But I just want to show you the options and the issues where I think you need to pay attention. Of course, all developments in the renewables markets are related and driven by the massive need for renewables over the next decades. Renewables are actually at the beginning of their life cycle and have been a very special niche for freaks and smart investors that have discovered how to make good money with that. For a long period, renewables were seen as a replacement for nuclear energy, but over the last 2 or 3 years, the keyword of decarbonization has given extreme tailwinds for renewables. I think this is important to keep in mind, that this decarbonization issue has not been the main driver for wind and solar in their first part of their life cycle, and the regulatory setup in the past has not been designed in a way that it was aimed to come to more decarbonization. I think if this would have been the policy driver at the very beginning, we would have a totally different system. And I think that adjustments of this setup need to be made if you want to achieve this decarbonization goal. All over the world, policymakers have made big announcements and announced big programs for climate change and reduction of carbon emissions in timelines that are, in my mind, impossible to meet. The European Green Deal is one example. Another is the climate plan of the Biden government in the US. China has also announced big programs. And it is absolutely unclear, I think, how we can achieve these goals. We are talking about replacement by fossil fuels, by renewables. We need to electrify industrial processes. And we have a very big pressure from finance industry, ESG criteria. Funds such as BlackRock have announced not to invest in dirty and carbon-intensive areas. Wherever and whenever we read a newspaper, we cannot escape the decarbonization trend. But very important is, if we do not want to end up in a green paradox, that means that we simply produce energy, dirty energy outside our own countries and import it from there. We must have a massive increase of renewable energy. We will never reach the targets of the Green Deal with some 2 or 3 rooftop solar installations at private houses. We can only reach it if large renewable scale energy facilities, and that is mainly wind onshore and offshore, is aggressively increasing. The big question is, how can we do that? And as a matter of fact, if we look at the growth of wind energy over the last 2 decades, it seems to be a rapidly growing business. We have average growth rates of more than 20% over the last 2 decades, more than 700 gigawatts installed. You can see here that it's only 35 gigawatt offshore. And on a slide like that, it looks very good, but we all should keep in mind that wind only contributes to around 1% of global energy and still less than 10% of global electricity. And that again underlines the need of a massive increase of renewable energy projects if we want to achieve the Green Deal targets. We also should keep in mind that this trend over the last 2 decades has been driven extremely by favorable regulations for wind energy, luxury feed-in tariffs in Europe, and a very nice tax system in the US. It was a luxury regulation for investors and a good way to make really lots of money. But I think that the regulatory setup is changing. It has changed already. It will change further. And the luxury systems that allow double-digit returns are coming to an end. The system develops more and more towards a market-based setup. And the very big question is subsequently, how can we achieve the growth that is required? I will just quickly go over the next two slides. I can't talk about that in detail for time reasons. This slide is showing the offshore announcements in Europe, and we can see there are global offshore announcements, and we can see there are huge offshore announcements for the years to come. Several hundreds of megawatts, but only a few are taking place in Europe, and we know what is installed so far. And this big question is, how much can this contribute to decarbonization? I think the impact will be very, very, very small over the next decade. The same is true for the announcements that have been made in Europe, more or less in all European regions. Very big announcements, but all this will take time. It will take a long, long time before this project will be commissioned. And my guess is that the offshore market announcements and projects will have almost no impact on carbon reduction until 2030. It will take place much later. And offshore will not help us. The other issue is that offshore in general is a playing field for the big boys. And when I'm talking about big boys, I'm talking about the very big boys. In a recent auction in UK for land use rights for potential offshore wind farms, all bids have been won by big energy companies such as British Petroleum, RWE, and so on. They have entered the race with very aggressive bids and squeezed out the traditional players out of the market. Hundreds of millions of British pounds will be paid to the British government without any security that these projects will ever be realized. They are all not permitted yet. They all have to go through lengthy procedures, permission procedures. And the parties that have won these auctions have no security that they can ever collect money. They don't know what kind of revenue source they have secured by bidding in these auctions. This shows how much money is in the market, but also how desperate the big boys obviously are. But as emphasized already, this type of future projects will, to my mind, contribute almost nothing to carbon reduction in the foreseeable future. If we look at the next slide, we can see the projected growth of wind energy over the next decade. And you might still have in mind that over the past 2 decades, the average growth was more than 20%. And we can expect that this growth will not continue. Of course, we still see a quite impressive increase of annual capacities of wind energy, but the growth rate is significantly going down. Offshore adds almost nothing until 2025. And even after that, installations will be low. This illustrates global installations here, including China. If we exclude China, for Europe, the picture looks even worse. And this slide also does not include deinstallations. That means decommissioning of existing wind farms that are coming to the end of their life cycle. One reason for that is certainly the change of regulations away from feed-in tariffs towards energy-only markets. And the other more important reasons are, I'm very convinced about that, bureaucracy, planning law at regional and municipal level, the acceptance issue, and the not in my backyard issue. That's at least my strong opinion. My opinion is it's not depending so much on the setup of a feed-in tariff structure, or if you are going for PPA or green certificates. The main reason and the main driver is bureaucracy, planning law, legal risks and the NIMBY issue. Let us maybe use the German example for a minute to see what happens in a country like Germany, which I regard to be at the first view, the land of milk and honey. German renewable energy law still provides a type of feed-in tariff in an auction process that is between 5.5 and 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That is very, very much. And this feed-in tariff is not only high, it is predictable for participants of auctions over the last couple of years. Every successful bidder can be sure that this tariff will be paid out for a period of 20 years. And I'm not sure about every region of this world, but I'm sure that nowhere else in this world exists such feed-in tariff paradise and such a great and reliable commercial framework for project developers. The only thing you have to do is to properly calculate the net capacity factor of your turbine, to predict your energy output, and to multiply the energy output with your feed-in tariff over 20 years. Then you are sure about the revenue stream in your project. You have to go for financing of your project. Banks are, of course, also aggressively running after permitted projects and are offering very, very favorable conditions. And we should expect that this land of milk and honey should result in wind turbines all over the place in Germany under such conditions. Of course, I know that many people think that there are already wind turbines all over the place, but under such conditions, the big question is, why aren't there more? What's happening that there are not more wind turbines being installed in Germany in this land of milk and honey? And you can see at the bottom side of the presentation, I don't know if you can really see it, it's maybe a bit small. You can see the amounts of megawatts that have been auctioned and the amounts of megawatt that have been submitted in the auction. And over the last 2 years, you can see the high orange column, that is the amount that was available in the auctions, and the green column is the amount of megawatts that have participated. There's one obvious and clear observation. The available amount is by far higher than the amount that is actually participating. We have much more capacity available than we have bidders. The very obvious question is, how can that happen? And why is it so? How is it possible? And the simple answer is bureaucracy and planning law. The overall planning law in Germany takes place at provincial level, at regional level, at municipal level. At all levels, we can observe the same attitude, not in my backyard. Very nice and diplomatic language at all levels, why wind energy is important and why we need it. Very nice declarations that everybody is generally supportive, and then very complicated explanations why wind is unfortunately not possible at a particular place or in a particular region. For environmental concerns, for protection of cultural heritage, for protection of landscape, for whatever reasons, the different levels find excuses not to design areas for wind energy developments. The most successful strategy at these levels is to simply delay it, to issue new reports, to draft expert reports, to assess expert reports, and to ask other experts to write new reports. And this is what happens in Germany. And I think the most important reason why nothing is happening is related to that. And it means that every region or every country that wants to do something to increase wind energy must address this. And vice versa, if you do not want to do it, then just leave the wind energy planning to various levels of regions. In the best case, several levels, and I can guarantee you that almost nothing will happen. And one other issue is, if you want to increase wind energy, you should set up a policy where the very regional level is getting some benefit from providing areas for wind farm development within their jurisdictions. I think that this is much more important than the particular design of a feed-in tariff, of a contract for difference or PPA design, because independent from the design of the revenue stream structure, every project will find its investor, and but you need, first of all, a project. One more slide, lessons learned from German perspective. The slide illustrates the amount of capacity accepted under the auction since 2017 versus the very much smaller amount of realized projects. The green part of the slide illustrates the realization rates, and we can see that in many cases, just a small portion of the projects that have been successful in the auction, and one prerequisite to be successful in the auction is to have a fully permitted project, is that not many of them, or a large portion of the projects that have been successful in the auctions, are not getting realized. And the question is, why is that happening? And the answer is, in my mind, the legal risk of project realization, because you can be sure that every project will be challenged at courts. There's either a neighbor, there's a municipality, a non-profit organization, an environmental organization, or whatever is there to initiate a legal action against a project. That is here the rule in every project. You can be sure to end up at the court, and you have to defend the permission that has been issued by sometimes not very experienced public authorities, and such court procedures are taking years and years and years. Before there is no final court decision, only very aggressive and crazy investors, we have done it several times, but we were sure that we will be successful at the courts, will invest. And of course, most projects are depending on bank financing. The banks will not pay out money as long as there is illegal action pending. I think the second lesson learned here is wind energy will only be increasing over time if the public authorities are doing a very professional job in permitting the projects, and if the legal system allows a very efficient and quick review of legal actions that are almost certainly happening, the more wind energy will be realized in a particular region. I think these are the two most important issues to address if a region wants to increase the use of wind energy, and if a region wants to make sure that there will be growth in the years to come. And these are even more important than the particular structure of a support scheme for renewables. Of course, I also want to talk about a bit this support scheme. I will flip over the next two slides. We all know we have the feed-in tariffs that has been replaced by some other systems like contract for difference, or even full market price systems over time. And I think independent from whatever system you are choosing, you will find an investor. Every project will find an investor. The main thing is to have a project, to have a permitted project that is based on solid planning law and that cannot be challenged at the court, that is bankable. These are, I think, the key issues. I don't want to go into details of the different feed-in systems or support schemes. I know that the PPA question is becoming more and more popular all over the world, and PPAs are, of course, also a very proper market design. They will, of course, have an influence on how the investor landscape will look like. But even with a PPA-based system, you have a very robust business case if the PPA has a minimum duration of time, and if the PPA is concluded with a solid partner. I think I'm running out a bit of time, so I will quickly go through 2 or 3 more slides, illustrating a financial model. I've shown that 2 years before, but I will do that quickly once again. It's a financial model for a Canadian project, but the mechanics of financial models are always the same. Here we have a very nice project in Canada, 4 wind turbines onshore, and it's based on an 80% debt equity ratio, and it offers an IRR of more than 12%. And now I want to just show you what happens if I change certain assumptions. If I, for example, increase the investment, the total investment of the project for in an amount was 4 million, so the total investment will be increased significantly. It has a small impact on the IRR. The IRR will go down just to 9%. So this is still quite nice. And so my message is that is not really the key point. Of course, it is very important, and of course, everybody wants to save costs, but in the end, this is not the main driver. The main driver is the wind capacity. If I increase then or decrease here the capacity a bit, so I have a less luxury site, then the IRR goes down. So that means we need to have good sites. The investment volume is not the main driver. Now I'm reducing the interest rate a bit, and the IRR goes up again, and this is the main driver, the interest rate. So bankability of a project is, I think, the key issue. And if I'm going instead of 80-20 debt equity ratio to a more sharper financing structure with 10%, I can even get again higher than 10% with my IRR. What I want to communicate here, I'm running out of time, is financing structure of the project is the key issue. Bankability of the project is the key issue. And that means legal stability of the project, legal safety of a permission, and of the planning law is the key issue. Banks will look very carefully at that. If even in a PPA landscape where PPA duration is just 12 years, I can achieve a robust IRR, and especially if I have a player that is not depending on any kind of bank financing, I can have an acceptable IRR of more than 5%. I'm sorry to go very quickly through these last slides of my presentation. Whenever you have questions, you are very welcome to ask me also outside this conference format. That was a bit quick now, but what I want to show you here is the key issues are, to my mind, not the particular design of support schemes. It is legal safety, stability, and bankability of a project, and investor expectations. There is a race to the bottom with investor expectations, but I'm sure that the priority is to have a project much more than it is to have a support scheme. And whatever support scheme you have, if you have projects, you will find an investor.
Very good. Thank you very much, Gerhard. Very insightful. And I don't see any questions here. Next, we will turn to the next speaker, also hearing more about feed-in tariffs and PPAs. But before that, we will take a short break. We will be right back.